You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O, Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is...
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Lee Child and Andrew Child on the show with me. We are talking about the brand new Jack Reacher book. This one is called Better Off Dead, and so excited to have the two authors here on the show with us today. Welcome, Lee and Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
I'm excited to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you as well, Andrew. Andrew was actually on the show a couple of years ago talking about his book at the time that he had out under his other writer name, Andrew Grant. And so excited to have you back, Andrew, and excited to have Lee with us as well. But we begin each show with the same question, and I thought this would be a fun question to pitch out to you guys. Lee, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
That's a great question, because I'm not like the usual writer, who claims to have composition books full of 5-page novels from the age of 7. I'm not like that guy at all. Harlan Coben has a really funny riff about the writers who decided they want to be writers while they're still fetuses, and I'm not like that at all. Sometimes I say I never wanted to be a writer. I still don't want to be a writer. All I want to be is an entertainer. The idea that doesn't matter what it is. I wish it could be music. I wish I was a great actor. I wish I was a stand-up comedian, whatever. I just want to give people a good time for a couple of hours or a couple of days. And I was just left in a situation 25 years ago where I had very little option in that field except to become a writer, which sounds kind of glib, but I'd been a gigantic reader all my life, and strangely, I never really connected the two things. I loved books, lived for books, but never really had any sensation of anybody writing them or publishing them. I just thought they were there. And so when I lost my last job and needed something else to do, I thought, books are created, they're written, you've read tens of thousands, try it. And so I did. So I'm an accidental writer rather than a purposeful one. This is not a lifelong dream. And I think in a way that helps. I'm not invested in the so-called externalities of being a writer. I do not have a black polo neck that I wear with a black leather jacket and smoke Gauloises and wear dark glasses. I'm not that. I never had that thing in my mind. So for me, it's an accidental but very happy discovery.
But you did work in the entertainment industry, didn't you? Just behind the scenes?
Yeah, absolutely. I've done nothing else my whole life other than serve an audience in one way or another. And those years, 0% of them were directly transferable, but 100% of them were transferable in the sense of learning that this is not about you. It is about the audience, first, second, and third.
Now, Andrew, from our previous conversation, if I remember right, you worked in theater and worked in that end of entertainment. Is that right?
That is right. Yeah. When what happened to me was again, like Lee, I never had this childhood dream of being a writer. In fact, it's a funny thing because we in society, we so kind of identify ourselves by our jobs, don't we? Right. And I still, just yesterday, I had to complete some form or something, and there was a question on there saying occupation. And even now, after 15 years, it's still kind of a surprise to me to have to write, novelist. It still seems like a weird thing. So for me, it was always about the storytelling. When I was a little kid, I loved nothing more than telling stories. Anything that happened to me, I always just sort of internalized it as ammunition for storytelling, fodder for storytelling. And so theatre turned out to be, for me, really a brilliant way to tell stories, because it's so, all stories are artificial in nature, really, even though they pretend, you've got this weird contrast in that what you're doing is completely made up, and yet what you want it to be like is as if it's real. So it's a very strange thing. And so theatre was great because in a way it was real, because the people were actually standing in front of you. They were acting out the action. They were speaking the lines that you heard rather than you reading them. So I loved theatre from a storytelling point of view. And when I left university with some friends, set up a theatre company, and we ran that for a couple of years. And it was absolutely fantastic. The only thing was, it's extremely difficult to make a living in the theatre, particularly when you were as self-indulgent as we were, because we only produced our own material. So we had an unheard of theatre company trying to attract people to come to plays that they'd never heard of in venues they'd never heard of. So, we were pretty much guaranteed to be broke. So, I switched from that into a real job just in order to pay off all my debts. And that stuck, I wound up stuck in that job for a long time. And when I was in that job, I would read a lot, couldn't go to the theatre much because I was on the road all the time. So I just read more. And one day I was reading a book, one of those books that starts out like the perfect thriller, where you don't eat, you don't drink. If you're on a bus, you don't get off, you don't go to work. You will do anything to find out what happens at the end of this book. But when I got to the end, it was terrible. And I remember thinking, well, why on earth did the author do that? Why didn't he do this? Why didn't he exploit this opportunity that he'd set up? Why didn't he go with it? And that was like an itch then. And I had to scratch that itch. I had to find out if I could do it. So for me, somebody once said, that the two saddest words in the English language are "what if," and I just didn't want to get to the end of my career. I was making a good living. I had a decent job, a decent house, decent car, all that stuff, and I was in the end prepared to put all that on the line because I didn't want to get to the end of my career and then say, well, that was fine, but what if I tried writing that book? So it was an itch that I just had to scratch.
So Andrew and Lee both. I find it interesting that Andrew, you're the younger brother of the family. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, there are four of us all together, and yeah.
And both of you wound up going to work in entertainment before you were both writers. Was this a family trait that was passed down? Was there ever encouragement from your parents, or why do you think that is?
Well, hollow laugh from both of us there, because absolutely not. And, it's difficult to communicate. Here we are in America now in 2021, but we grew up even though Andrew's much younger than me, the atmosphere was still the same, essentially. We grew up in post-war Europe with very grim and repressive parents who were already at that point 50 years out of date. And they had a kind of, I don't know what, vague bourgeois dream that we would become civil servants or, minor politicians, something largely in the public good, maybe doctors, maybe solicitors or something like that. And entertainment was the furthest thing. There was a kind of Puritan or rather Calvinist atmosphere where the biggest danger in life was anything that might bring joy or happiness. And so, this was completely against our background and upbringing. And, the look on my parents' face when I did it, and then when Andrew went into the theater, it was like, they were like, oh my God, here we go again. We've got another rubbish son in the rackety world of show business. And, it was exactly like that. And I'm not saying it was done out of malice or anything like that. It was just they were so narrowly fixed in what they thought was right, and so narrowly fixed about the dour realities of life. I remember, when I did become a writer, I'd lost my job. I decided to become a writer. And then a month or so later, for some reason, my parents dropped by to visit. And I said to my dad, by the way, I lost my job. And he said, well, what are you going to do now? And I said, I'm writing a thriller. And he said, I bet you 10,000 to 1 it doesn't work. And,
Thanks, Dad.
it was very much a true statement. This is a numbers-based guy. He was a sort of accountant, basically like a forensic accountant, worked for the British equivalent of the IRS. It was all fact for him, numbers, logic, reality. And he was probably accurate. It probably was 10,000 to 1, but it's not the sort of thing to say if you're trying to be encouraging. So, yeah, it was like, yeah, thanks, Dad.
What about you, Andrew? Do you what do you think about the two brothers that become novelists that both went to work in the entertainment industry?
Well, first of all, everything Lee just said about the parents was absolutely correct. I mean, I can't in my entire life remember ever have a single word of encouragement, anything yet. I mean, in a way, it kind of prepares you nicely for all the 1-star reviews on Amazon, because, I just became accustomed at a very young age to whatever I did and however hard I worked. It was never acceptable. It was never good enough. So, that was kind of, part of the course. So that hardened us up. But then, I guess in a way, I mean, first of all, as you can see with what we're doing right now, we're similar people. We have a similar outlook. If you look at our bookshelves, they've got very, very similar books on them. We like the same music. We like the same kinds of cars. We go to the same kind of places. So we are very, very similar. So when I had that moment with that novel, that set me off on this path, Lee was already established. So, you think about that 10,000 to 1 business, I guess in my mind, I kind of narrowed those odds because I thought, well, I guess you could have interpreted it differently. You could have said if it's 10,000 to 1 for one brother to make it, it must be 1,000,000 to 1 for both. But I chose to look at it the other way and say, well, if he can do it, maybe I can do it, So it smoothed the path a little that way, I guess, in my mind at least.
Sure. Well, and both of you went on to create great series characters. Jack Reacher, of course. Paul McGrath that you created, Andrew, fantastic series character. When you were getting started and Lee was already established and Jack Reacher had kind of become a cultural phenomenon in a lot of ways, was it, I know you thinking about those odds that you were just talking about, if one brother's 10,000 to 1, two must be 1,000,000 to 1. Was there some encouragement, knowing that you did have a brother that did succeed? Did you ever call Lee and ask advice or just ask for encouragement, or were there just phone conversations that just bolstered your attitude? Sort of knowing someone that close to you that had made it had to be incredible.
Well, it was, but I mean, it really cut both ways, because in terms of how it helped, I like to visualize things. So I remember having discussions with him where he kind of explained how the industry works, and I visualized the path I was on as a bit like a hurdle race. I was at the starting line, or at least even trying to get to the starting line, and I could see the finishing line way off in the distance with a set of hurdles. And because he had already trod that course, he could say to me, yeah, these are what the hurdles are. This is what you have to do. First, you do this. Second, you do that. Third, you do, So it gave me, the kind of person I am. I like to understand the journey that I'm embarking on. So I could look at it and I could say, yeah, I know the ride I'm buying the ticket for. I can understand what's in store for me. No idea if I'll get to the end, but I know what I have to do. So that was really, really helpful. But then the thing that was less helpful is my own sort of stupid personality, because I'm so ridiculously sort of stubborn and independent. Even if he had offered to do everything for me, I would have refused, because I've just had this ridiculous built-in obsession about doing everything for myself. So I probably turned down opportunities for help that a sensible person would have accepted. And then finally, when when the book was done and it was time to try to sell it, I was actually going to use a different pen name at the time to try to put an even further barrier between us. Didn't approach Lee's agent, didn't approach his publisher. I didn't want anybody to know. I knew it would come out eventually, but at the time when I got that first contract, I was determined that it would be on my own merits and that no one would even know about the connection. And fortunately that happened. Then my agent, when I told her about my pen name, she said, well, your pen name's stupid. You should just go with your real name. So I did. And I felt like, in a way, the pen name was like a kind of hire car in a way. It was just a vehicle to get me from one place to the other. The starting point being this guy who had been locked in the telecoms industry for so many years, having to come up with the self-belief that you could reinvent and you could become this person that seemed impossibly far away, in this role that was impossibly far away. So it was very useful from that point of view. But then once, I got to the end and fortunately somebody wanted to publish the first book, then I felt, it kind of did its job. I don't need it anymore. So I did switch back to the way that it had been. So and then from there on in, there was a certain amount, in the early years anyway, if we were at BoucherCon together or something, you'd hear, mutterings behind people's sort of, hands, saying, well, how hard can it be if Lee Child's your brother? I'd say, well, actually it's harder because then people already have a set of expectations. The bar is pretty high and you have to try to get as close as you can.
I didn't mind when they asked that question. What really bothered me is like at least 10 times now, people have said, oh, I see you writing with your son. And that hurts a little bit.
Lee, what did you think when Andrew first called you or told you in conversation that he was going to write a novel? What was your first reaction?
Well, it was extremely positive. I mean, I think everybody should write a novel. Andrew was in exactly the same spot that I was, that he'd been reading all his life. And if you arrive around the age of, let's say, 40, and you've been reading all your life, then you've got two choices. Either you carry on with that for the rest of your life, which is fantastic, and you get great joy out of that, or you think, all right, now my gas tank is full, maybe I could try it as well. So when he said he was going to do it, I was very happy, very positive about it. Simultaneously a little bit worried about it because it is difficult. It's very hard to get the break, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. There's no serious help that I could have given him. There are kind of shortcuts. There are certainly explanations of what a certain thing implies, contractual things that I've fallen victim to before I can tell him to avoid. Those small details, sure, you can explain those, but other than that, 100% of it is the book any good? And so if he was not capable of writing a good book, it would have failed anyway. As a matter of fact, it was a really good book, in which case then, he's at the starting line with a really good book. But there's very little anybody else can do about it. And so his progress was all his, absolutely nothing to do with me. And as a reader and an observer, a third party, I was loving it. And that was my absolute one inhibition about asking him to continue the Reacher series, that it would damage my readers' enjoyment of his series. I've loved them all, actually, but the Paul McGrath, the Janitor series, I had to...
Fantastic.
It is. It's fantastic. And I had to ask him, would you put this on the back burner to do the Reacher stuff? And I honestly thought he would say no, because it was great stuff and he was really into it and it was interesting and there was more coming. So I thought he would say no. And in a way, I wanted him to say no because I want the Paul McGrath books. But he said yes. And so, I'm sincerely hoping that there will be more Paul McGrath. But at the moment, it's all Reacher. And so in a way, the Reacher readers, he's doing them a favor. Reacher is continuing at the expense of somebody else.
Dabble is a proud sponsor of Author Stories. Dabble is an easy-to-use cloud-based writing tool that gives writers a way to organize, plot, and create amazing stories wherever they are. Write in our desktop app on your Mac or Windows computer, tablet, or mobile device. Dabble syncs your latest version with the cloud on all your devices. Write anywhere and anytime inspiration strikes. We got you. Dabble is my preferred writing tool, and I think it will be yours as well. Visit dabblewriter.com for your free trial. You have an amazing story idea. You execute the writing and editing flawlessly, and now the only thing missing are readers. We can help you go from author to author superhero with Story Origin. Story Origin is a one-stop shop for marketing tools with a community of amazing authors working together to find reviewers, build mailing lists, increase sales, and collect feedback from beta readers. Everything an author needs, all in one place, from providing review copies or beta copies, reader magnets to ensure you stay connected with readers, easily distribute audio promo codes, universal retail links to send readers directly to the proper point of purchase, or provide direct download links for members of your mailing list. Story Origin has all the tools you need in one easy-to-use site. Use the promo code ASP21 at checkout when subscribing to the yearly plan, and you will get 10% off your first year. This code will expire December 31st, so hurry over and subscribe now. StoryOriginApp.com.
Lee, your story of beginning that first Jack Reacher novel and, losing your job and, saying, oh, I'm going to do this. This is going to kind of be my make it or break it moment. And you getting paper and pencil and sitting down to start that first book. A few years ago, Andy Martin shadowed you as you wrote your 20th novel, and he wrote a book about it. Reacher Said Nothing. Fantastic book. It was a really interesting look at an outsider's perspective of your writing process. And at that point, after 20 novels, you had kind of developed some habits, some almost superstitions about beginning a new book. And September 1st began a new book, and he went into I'm trying to remember. It's been a little bit since I read it, but I think you had very specific ways of how you had your computer set up and a solid color background. I think, it's just kind of these rituals, so to speak, that we go through when starting a new project. Well, now that the two of you are working together, what is your new project? What are your new project rituals? What things do you do to kick off the creative process for a new book?
Really, pretty much the same as it always was. I always started on September the 1st because that was the historic anniversary of starting the first book. So that was partly ritual and comfort and superstition to an extent, but it was also partly practical. If you're going to publish a book a year, you've got to write a book a year. And if you're going to do that, you better get on with it. You better start and get it finished. And so to give my year a shape that was productive, this is not a hobby. It is not just doing it for fun. This is real life. And so you need a certain amount of discipline imposed, which you do to yourself. And then the little rituals and superstitions become a kind of warm-up routine, like when you go to the ball game and you see the players stretching on the field and so on before the game. The little rituals act like that. They get you into it, and then off you go for the day's work. So I would defend them all as kind of practical and useful prompts to get on with the work.
How about you, Andrew? How do you feel about the beginnings of a project?
Yeah, very much the same. I mean, I guess the one thing that's different for me is that when I started any of the books that I wrote on my own, I didn't have a set day of the year that I would begin. I had this feeling in my mind that was, I'd be mulling over the ideas for the book. They would be kind of coalescing at the back of my mind. And sometimes when it's time for birds to migrate, you see a whole bunch of them on the telegraph wires, and they just seem to be sitting around. And then for no apparent reason, they just know it's time to go, and they all take off and fly away. It's kind of like that for me with my own books, where I would think, okay, I know I'm getting close to being ready to start, but not quite yet. And then one day I would just feel the same as those birds getting ready to fly. It would be like, right, today's the day. Today is the day we're starting. That's different now because, we've maintained that tradition of starting on the 1st of September. But what is the same is that there is that really sort of, exactly as Lee described, that way that you go through, you open, different people use different programs and whatever, but, you open up your word processor, you create a new document, you give it a name, you decide on all those little personal details, like what size margins do you like, what spacing do you like, all of those kind of things. And yeah, again, I like to, I don't want to be distracted by anything, so I have my computer set up so that you're in, at one point, I don't know if it still does, but Word used to call it authoring mode, which I used to think was hilarious. When you've just got the page on the screen and then just a black panel down either side. That's my favorite, because then there's nothing to distract you, nothing to annoy you. You've got to turn off all the grammar stuff, because otherwise it's constantly nagging you for broken sentences and all of that kind of stuff that I don't like it when people tell me what to do. So when the computer tries to tell me what to do, that's a really bad start. So get everything set up the way you want, and then it just smooths the path. It means that you're ready to go, and every day when there's plenty of things that are going to get in your way and make you think, oh well, maybe I shouldn't work today because I stubbed my toe, or my CDs aren't in alphabetical order, or whatever it might be. You've got to have as few of those obstacles as possible so that you can get yourself in that chair and get on with the job, because like Lee says, it's not a hobby. You've got to do it or else you don't eat.
Right. Lee, there's a couple of things about your writing process that have kind of become myth in the writing community. One is that you are a complete pantser, that you have no idea what's going to happen in the story, and you just start writing into the dark. And the book we mentioned a moment ago by Andy Martin, it kind of really looks into that aspect of your writing process. The other sort of myth that's built up is that you write one draft and that's it, and you give editors a little bit of leeway, but not much. Well, now that you're working with Andrew, how do you feel about those kind of hard and fast rules that you set for yourself? Do you approach the story creation in the same way?
Yeah, we do. I do, certainly, because those things are absolutely true. I have no plan, no outline. I literally do not know what is going to happen more than a couple of lines ahead. But that is, and I only do one draft. That is true. But both of those things sound a bit glib. They sound a bit superficial. And there's actually more depth behind them, because really nobody writes without an outline. You always have a kind of consensus outline in your head of what a novel is, what a genre novel is, what a thriller is. And don't forget, I've been in entertainment now more than 45 years, right. I think it is. And so you get a sort of rhythm baked into your DNA about pace, about suspense, about cliffhangers, and so on. It becomes almost automatic. So my method is less glib than it sounds. What I'm really doing is abandoning myself to my subconscious, which has been trained by tens of thousands of books and movies and TV shows, poems, songs, anything that gives you a sense of momentum and tension and suspense. It's all in there. So it's like falling backward onto a trampoline with your eyes closed. Feels a bit weird, but you're going to be all right. And so it's not as perilous as it sounds, as a matter of fact. And then the one draft thing, I do it with such intensity. And of course, when you start in the morning. Part of the ritual Andrew was talking about for me is about rereading what I did yesterday. Smooth it out, reread it, change a couple of words maybe, and then launch onward into that day's work. And so by the end of the draft, it's been churned over and over, like, right. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, over and over and over on a daily basis until it's finished. And therefore, it's not a question of dashing it off and going back to the beginning and discovering what you wrote. I'm checking that daily as I go along so that by the time it's finished, it is finished. And I've gone through this strange mental process whereby I'm obviously a normal person. I'm not crazy or anything, but when I'm doing it, I believe that it's true. It is the only way to achieve the authenticity you need and the emotional investment that you need. The only way to do that is to let half of your brain assume that this is really happening. And so that at the end of the draft, my editor, in the old days, the editors would say, yeah, this is great, but wouldn't it be better if this happened after that? And I say, yeah, probably, but it didn't. And to go back and change that seems to me dishonest, on some kind of artistic level. It seems to compromise the integrity of the work. If you go back and patch up things that were awkward or difficult, well, too bad. There's awkwardness and difficulty in life. Reacher had to deal with it. That's the end of it.
Right. Andrew, knowing your brother and knowing his creative process, when he offered this role to you to come along and co-create Jack Reacher with him, did anything about the way Lee works intimidate you, scare you, or did you wonder, how am I going to merge the way I do things with the way Lee does things? Were there any of those questions?
Absolutely, there were, yeah. Because, it was a huge undertaking and a huge responsibility. There are goodness knows how many Reacher fans out there, millions all over the world. And, I'm one of them. I was the first one. So I know what it is like to have that that amazing anticipation waiting for the new Reacher. And the last thing either of us would want to do would be disappoint anybody. So I knew it was a huge responsibility to produce the Reacher books. So then you've got to look into, well, what goes into producing them. And one of the things was to kind of adopt, or at least adapt my methods to make them more in line with Lee's, because I want the outcome. If you had a situation where somebody went to the bookstore to buy the new Reacher, and for some reason there was only one copy left, and the cover had been torn off, anything that indicated who had written it had been removed. All you had was the pages with the story in. I would want somebody to buy that book, take it home, read it, and not know there was a difference. Just say, wow, 28, 29, 30 books in, they're just as good as they ever were. It's not about the name on the cover, it's about the character. So how do you produce that character in a consistent and authentic way? And so I feel like trying to do everything in exactly the same way is an important factor. And one of the things that I think you sense in a Reacher book, if you look at the first 24 anyway, that Lee wrote on his own, there's a real sense of sort of confidence to the writing. And I think some of that comes from the fact that writing without an outline is a bit like walking on a tightrope with no safety net. You just have to have confidence that you're going to get to the other side. You can't think to yourself, well, it doesn't matter if I fall off because there's a safety net down there that's going to catch me. And it kind of breeds that confidence into the prose. And that's something that I've tried very hard to replicate. Not just the working method, but the way that the prose works, the way that it grabs you at the beginning of the book and doesn't let you go till the end. So, there were an awful lot of questions in my mind, and I was conscious of an awful lot of things I was going to have to either change or improve to make the grade. So, it was very nerve-wracking indeed the first time through. But then, even having read Andy Martin's book, even having talked to Lee so many times over the years about writing, there's always a little part of you that thinks, well, could it really be true? Does he perhaps secretly sketch some out? And what I found out was no, absolutely not. And when we were writing the Sentinel, time after time, we'd finish a passage, would decide whether that we were happy, and I would say, all right, so what's next? And he'd say, well, I don't know. And so, a couple of times I actually kind of secretly snuck off and tried to plot out a little bit into the future. And what I discovered was it was a total waste of time, a complete waste of time. I had stuff that I think on its own was actually really good, but it just didn't fit the story because you can't tell Reacher where to go. He goes where he wants, and you just have to kind of follow along and write it down. So that was fascinating, and that really helped me when it came time for writing Better Off Dead, because I understood then. I knew the reality. I knew how it worked, and we could just launch in and exactly that. It's simultaneously very frightening launching in with no idea where the story is going, but also extremely exhilarating because you get places that I'm sure you never would have got otherwise if you'd done it in some kind of clinical, pre-planned way that then locks you into a particular direction.
Speaking of Reacher does what Reacher wants to do, Lee, you have first off, readers a lot of times will read a story and try to figure out where the writer has written himself into the story. That there's a protagonist in the story that's really a reflection of what the writer wants the reader to think about them, or maybe people use characters as their own therapy in a way. But Lee, you have kind of famously said that Reacher, you hold Reacher at arm's length, and you don't let him get too close to you, and you don't let yourself bleed into the story. And you've been misquoted and time and again, and by saying that you hate Reacher and all of that sort of thing. But in writing a character like Reacher that you do hold at arm's length, does it become easier for Andrew to pick up the writing of this story because it's not so wrapped up in you? Like, Reacher is actually a third entity in this relationship between Lee and Andrew and the Jack Reacher books. There's a third person here. Does having that relationship with Reacher up to this point, does that make it easier, Andrew, to pick up and write the stories?
I think it probably must, and there's two parts behind this answer. One is that I think, yes, inevitably, any writer puts in themselves into the character. All fiction is essentially autobiographical in a way, because you've got a character who feels in a certain way, who values certain things. That is your proposition. And you can absolutely do the reverse of yourself. You do that every time because that's the bad guy. But your core values as a person inevitably find their way into the hero. So to an extent, yeah, Reacher is autobiographical, which is not a problem because Andrew's autobiography would be at least similar to mine. So at least he understands what Reacher is doing and thinking. But the thing about keeping him at arm's length was really an antidote to what I've observed as a reader in lots of other long-running series, that there's a terrible danger that at some point the author falls in love with the character. Yeah. And that just destroys any kind of critical distance, any kind of rigor or plausibility about it. You can see it stretching back to the days of Dorothy Sayers, for instance, who started writing about Peter Wimsey, and the first many books were great, but then she fell in love with the guy. And the latter books are so sugary that you could catch diabetes just by reading them. And that has happened so many times that I said to myself, don't do that. Don't fall in love with the Reacher. Keep him at arm's length. Keep some kind of hostile distance between the author and the character. And that has worked out so far. Reacher is not a goody-goody. He's not too perfect. He's not sugary. He's a nasty guy in a lot of ways. And that authenticity and plausibility has served the series well, but it's also, I hope, helping Andrew now, because Reacher he's like an extra brother to us. He's not mine. He's an independent character that I know well and Andrew knows well. If Andrew's thinking about Reacher, he's not thinking about me. He's thinking about this third party.
Yeah, and there's an analogy to what Lee was saying earlier about the preparation for being a writer is being a reader, and talking about by the time you get to your late 30s, early 40s, how you've read hopefully sufficient number of books that your tank is full and you're ready to go as a writer. It's kind of like, but the thing is with that process is it's unconscious. You don't realize you're doing it. You don't sit down as a kid or as a young adult thinking, well, I'm going to read these books so that in a certain number of years' time, I'll have read enough to be a writer. You just read them because you love them. And it was the same with Reacher. I would love the books. And then when we got together, we would always be talking about Reacher. We'd be kind of daydreaming together saying, oh, well, what would Reacher do about this? What would Reacher do about that? And again, without realizing it at the time, it was a brilliant kind of training ground ready for when, it's time for me to put Reacher's stories down on paper as well, So without appreciating what I was doing, I was almost like I was on a kind of 25-year scholarship or apprenticeship or whatever, learning how to be the next custodian of Reacher's stories.
With last year's book, The Sentinel, being the first book that you collaborated on, now following up this year with Better Off Dead, what did you learn from writing that first book that now when you started this book and probably I'm assuming that you guys are probably are working on the third book that you collaborated on by this point. But what did you learn in that first collaboration that starting the second one, you knew what to expect or had worked out, the duties between you or how you were going to work together? What I'm asking is what happened in the second book that the process of the first book enabled you to know what to expect?
I think the main thing I learned is that it's going to be okay. I can trust him and rely on him to get it done. I mean, that was the huge takeaway from the first one, which was slightly different in as much as we had no kind of outline for the first one, but we had a purpose behind the Sentinel, which was to make Reacher come face to face with a plot that was modern, that was up to date technologically. Because one of the things that was worrying me was how far behind Reacher was falling in terms of relationship to living in the real world today. Very old-fashioned Luddite Reacher is. Now, I find that readers like it, actually, if the hero is a bit behind the curve technologically, because it makes the reader feel secure about their own relationship with technology. But Reacher was grotesquely out of date. And it was charming 10, 15 years ago, maybe, where Reacher would express puzzlement about texting or something. But it actually, now, 15 years later, it's not so charming. It's a bit ridiculous. So we had a purpose for the Sentinel, which was to bring Reacher face to face with a technological plot that would allow him in the reader's mind to move into the current day a little bit more. Whereas with Better Off Dead, we had no preconception about what it needed to be. We thought we've done that job. That is now achieved. Now we've got total freedom just to do what we want. But reading between the lines, maybe Andrew learned something from the first one, because what happened with the second one was that he wrote the first chapter in secret. And I was sitting right here actually playing some music, and my phone dinged with the email, and it emailed me the opening chapter of Better Off Dead. And it was fantastic. I mean, it was literally, and this was obviously for me the 26th time that I'd been putting Reacher through his paces. And for a first chapter, after 26 first chapters, to be that excited about it, I was thrilled. And so that was the starting point, this secretly written first chapter. So maybe we should ask him now live on the podcast, why did you do it secretly? What was so awful about the way we did the Sentinel?
Well, it's interesting because I guess it would come across as having been done in secret because you didn't know that I was doing it. But I never sort of set out to to conceal it or to try to get it done in the dark. It was just that I was really excited about it. I had an idea that I thought would be really fun. And so one day, without having to worry about outlines and figuring out what happens 500 pages in the future, I thought, I'll just sit down at the computer and I'll play with this. And so it just was one of those times, when you're writing, sometimes it's really hard and you can't get the next words, but sometimes they flow. And this time it just flowed. So without it, I did it kind of just because I was excited to do it. And then when it was working and when it did form up the whole of that first chapter, I was then excited to see what you thought about it. So I see how it would appear from your point of view, but it wasn't kind of designed to be a clandestine thing. It was just once it started, I started with a little tiny snowflake at the top of the hill and gave it a little push. And before I knew it, I had this enormous snowball at the bottom that I was really excited about. So, funny how it happened, but I think it worked out for the best.
It really did. It's a great chapter, and it really gave me encouragement that, if you want to ask me what I've learned from this collaboration, it is fine. It is going to work. And how rare is that? You have an idea and it actually works. So I'm thrilled with it.
So what can you tell us about the new book? What does Jack Reacher find? Well, first off, where in the world is Jack Reacher? One thing that I love about a new Jack Reacher book is opening it up to figure out where Reacher is this time, and because he's such a wanderer, and half of the fun is just figuring out where he's wound up and what wrong is gonna confront him. So what can readers expect from the new book?
Well, Reacher's kind of making his way gradually west. He's come up with a somewhat whimsical idea that he wants to go to San Francisco. So he's heading west, and he's made it as far as he's wound up actually right on the border. He's in Arizona, and he's right on the border between Arizona and Mexico, literally back against the border fence when the book opens.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, so what happens is the book opens with this enormous, ugly-looking, mysterious stranger standing by the border fence, waiting for a clandestine meeting that's been set up with one person. But when a car pulls up to at the appointed time, instead of one person getting out, 4 people get out. None of them being the one he was supposed to be meeting. These 4 people decide that they're gonna they're going to capture this enormous guy and drag him off somewhere. And of course, things don't work out too well for him. The 4 people don't come out of the encounter very well. But right at the end, when it looks like this enormous stranger has prevailed, another person steps out of some shadows and shoots him in the chest. And the next scene is the local morgue where this enormous body is on the slab, and they're looking through his possessions. And he doesn't actually have very many. He just has a folding toothbrush, some cash, an ATM card, and an expired passport. And the name in the passport reads Jack Non-Reacher.
Lee, when you read that first chapter and you read what Andrew had come up with, what did that do for your imagination and where you could see Reacher?
Well, it was hysterical because in the first chapter he's not named Reacher. He's just this tall, huge guy, and of course, I'm looking at it purely as a reader. I'm in the same boat at that point as millions of other Reacher readers. So I'm reading it and thinking, well, obviously this has got to be Reacher. And then he gets shot and killed. And I'm thinking, what? And then I'm thinking, he hasn't actually shot and killed him. There's no way. So how are we going to get out of this? What is really behind it? And it was like an explosion in my head. You know, there are literally a dozen different ways we could have opened the next chapter, and virtually an infinite series of possibilities we could have gone down. And so as a reader, I was kind of terrified by that first chapter, but as a writer, I was thinking, wow, this is the gift that is going to keep on giving throughout this whole book. And I think if I'd done that first chapter, and I've done a couple of good first chapters over the previous 24 books, but this was way up there. And I was secretly at the bottom of my mind. My ultimate worry about this whole thing is that he's going to be better at it than I was. And I was thinking, oh my God, he is better.
What are some of the challenges to sharing the work? And you know, Andrew, you talked earlier about the process of setting up a Word document. Do you guys still are you collaborating in Word, and are you just emailing a document back and forth to each other? Or what are some of the logistical challenges of sharing the workload?
Well, I don't really, we haven't really encountered any logistical challenges, because kind of the master document lives on my computer so that we can keep everything straight. But then when we work on stuff, we email that back and forth until we're happy with it. And then when we have a part that we're, you know, when the next section is you know, we're both happy, then I just copy that into the master document, and it just grows incrementally from there until it's finished. So yeah, the logistics are pretty straightforward, honestly.
And the pandemic has helped us in a weird way, because I think we had both expected that we would be sitting nose to nose across the same desk thrashing it out. And the problem with that would have been, I can identify the problem with that you introduce an idea, you preface it, you explain it, you massage it, you say, I think we should do this because then it'll suggest this other thing and it'll bring in that other reference. And then you reveal it, and the other person has got a preconception by then that this is going to work. But because of the pandemic, we took it as serious as we could, and we worked separately and remotely. And all we had were the words on a screen, emailed back and forth. No explanation, no justification, no persuasion, no discussion. It was just the words, and they either worked or they didn't work. And in the same way that they would either work or not work for the reader. And I think it was a huge benefit. And even after, if ever, the pandemic business dies down, we should maybe keep on working like this, because it is about the words. That's all we'll ever have. And so I think that's very valuable.
Lee, I know that you're taking some of this free time to work on the TV show that's coming from Amazon and some other things, but what's occupying most of your creative time these days?
Consuming. I mean, the only thing that I ever disliked about being a writer was that the hours you spend writing your own stuff are hours that you can't spend reading other people's stuff. And it cannot be emphasized enough that all writers are primarily readers. Yeah. So what I'm doing is catching up on everything that I haven't had time to keep abreast with, not just fiction and my friends and other thriller writers, but everything, nonfiction, all kinds of things. I'm just back to where I was as a 7-year-old, just utterly entranced, lying on a sofa with a book.
Andrew, what does the future of Jack Reacher look like?
Well, you know, I'm just enjoying so much just getting to tell his stories. So, you know, I hope that there's a very long future for Jack Reacher. And, you know, I certainly don't envisage any massive changes. You know, Reacher's not about to, you know, start becoming a kind of tree-hugging vegan or anything. You know, he's going to essentially continue in his same vein. and keep doing the same things for as long as readers want to read about him.
Love it. Well, the brand new book is called Better Off Dead, and when you're hearing this episode, it's available everywhere today. We're going to put a link to it in the show notes where you can grab it in hardcover or Kindle edition or audiobook. I'm a huge fan of the Reacher audiobooks these days, and so we'll put links to all of those in the show notes. You guys have a website for Jack Reacher, and I love the way that you do this. Is a lot of authors will have a website with the URL that's their name, and Jack Reacher actually has his own website, doesn't he?
And that is how I always wanted it. I never wanted anybody to go into the bookstore and ask for Better Off Dead or ask for the new Lee Child. I want people to go into the bookstore and say, have you got the new Jack Reacher yet? Because that's what it's all about. It's about the character. That's what stories have always been about. Authors are not important. Publishers are certainly not important. It's the character and the relationship with the reader. And so if everything is about Jack Reacher, that's exactly what I wanted it to be. Not about me, not about Andrew. It's about the character. Thanks, Hank.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Hank. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Jason and Joey took their food trays outside and sat high above the parking lot on the secluded stairwell that had become their lunchtime hangout, picking at their Thanksgiving specials and swapping updates. They were almost finished eating before Jason managed to screw up the courage to say what he needed to. "I want to apologize." Joey looked puzzled. "What the hell for?" "Because your coma was my fault." "Yours? The horseman beamed me. You didn't." "Hey, want to see something cool? Look what I found on my phone." Joey produced the device, hit a few buttons, and swiped his finger. An orange circle hung in a field of black, overexposed, something that had been moving fast when the flash caught it. "I was trying to get his picture, right? Like an idiot? Well, I didn't get him, but that is the pumpkin he threw at me." Jason stared at the blurry orange shape for a long time. "Cool. Cool? Can you imagine if we actually got a picture of the Headless Horseman? We'd be famous by now." He pocketed the phone. "Hey, do you want the rest of this turkey? It looks like bologna." "Tastes like bologna, too." He speared the slice anyway. "Look, this is going to sound weird, but I think I made you a target." "What do you mean?" "I made you a target by telling you about my gift. It's some sort of magical rule. If we reveal ourselves to a normal person, whoever we tell becomes a target for ghosts. And usually, they die." "And you told me anyway?" "No, I'd already told you. There was no way to untell you. Don't be mad. It all worked out, right? Right?" Joey's expression had darkened. "Give me a second here. And there's a bright side." "What bright side?" "Now you'll have a gift too." "Me?" "That's what your coma was. Some kind of transition. You got targeted, but you survived. You'll be a founder now, like Ichabod. You'll pass your gift to your kids like he passed his to me." Joey looked worried. "What kind of gift will I get?" "People get gifts that complement their natural abilities. It could be anything." "Anything? So, I could read minds?" "I guess." "Turn purple and levitate?" "Probably not. Something that expresses the essential you." "Then I'll have an actor's gift. What's an actor's gift?" Jason shrugged. "Super narcissism? Shut up. So you're not mad?" Joey was shaking with excitement. "Mad? This is the coolest thing ever! We'll be like the dynamic duo, fighting supernatural foes up and down the eastern seaboard." Jason laughed, feeling epic relief. "I thought you'd be pissed." "Nah. What's a little coma between friends?" He took a bite out of a Nutter Butter, grinning madly. "I'm going to be a superhero." "But you can't tell anyone." "Why not? Weren't you listening? Everyone we tell dies. You can't talk about your gift to anybody. But if they were targeted and lived, we could have our own X-Men. Yeah, or all your friends could die. Do you want to risk that? No, I guess not. But I don't do closets very well, you know? I came out at conception. Promise to keep it to yourself. Yeah. Joey shifted sideways and walked his sneakers up the brick. So, the essential me. Ooh, I know what gift I'll get. I'll get a singer's gift. What's a singer's gift? Jason shrugged. Superhuman drug tolerance? Shut up!